The Unexpected Encounter. Los Angeles, 7:45 p.m. Emma Carter wiped her hands on her black apron and let out a deep sigh. The warm aroma of roasted coffee beans mixed with the sweet scent of vanilla and caramel in the bustling cafe. She had been working at Brew Haven for the past 2 years, juggling trays, dodging impatient customers, and flashing the best customer service smile she could muster. But tonight felt different. There was a quiet storm brewing inside her, a longing for something bigger, something beyond the walls of the cafe where she spent most of her days. She had dreams, ambitions, but life had a way of keeping her tied down. As she adjusted her notepad and pen, ready to take the next order, the cafe's glass doors swung open. The small bell jingled softly. Emma glanced up, barely expecting anything unusual, but then her eyes widened. Standing in front of her, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans, was none other than Keanu Reeves. Her heart nearly stopped. She had seen celebrities before. This was LA, after all. But Keanu was different. He wasn't just famous, he was beloved. His kindness, humility, and generosity were legendary. And here he was, standing just a few feet away, looking around as if he were trying to decide on an order. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, reminding herself to act professional. She quickly stepped forward. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Brew Haven. What can I get you?" Keanu looked up, his deep brown eyes meeting hers. There was something about his gaze, calm, yet carrying a depth of experience. He said with a warm smile. "Just a black coffee, please." Emma nodded, writing it down even though she didn't need to. Coming right up. As she turned toward the counter, she noticed something odd. A man sitting at the far end of the cafe, hidden behind a newspaper, kept glancing toward Keanu. His fingers drummed anxiously on the table. Something about him sent a chill down her spine. Shrugging it off, Emma quickly prepared the order, adding a small cookie on the side. On the house, she wasn't sure why, but she felt compelled to. She walked back to Keanu, placing the coffee and cookie on the counter. "Here you go. And, the cookie is complimentary." Keanu raised an eyebrow, amused. "That's very kind of you." He picked it up and took a small bite, nodding in appreciation. "Delicious." Emma smiled, feeling a sense of pride. But before she could say anything else, the man at the far table suddenly stood up. He was tall, wearing a heavy jacket despite the warm LA weather. He approached the counter, his eyes locked onto Keanu. Emma's instincts screamed at her. Something wasn't right. "Mr. Reeves," the man said, his voice low but urgent. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Keanu's posture shifted slightly, sensing the tension. "Do I know you?" "No, but you need to listen to me," the man insisted. His hand twitched near his pocket. Emma didn't even think. She stepped between them. "Sir, if you'd like to speak with him, you can do it outside," she said firmly. "This is a peaceful place." The man's eyes flickered to her, irritation flashing across his face. "This doesn't concern you." Keanu held up a hand. "It's okay. Let's not make a scene." But Emma wasn't convinced. Something about the man's demeanor made her uneasy. Then, in a split second, he reached into his pocket. Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest coffee pot and swiftly tilted it toward the man's wrist, letting the scorching liquid spill onto his hand. He let out a yelp, jerking back in shock. "Get out," she said, her voice sharp. The entire cafe went silent. The man shot her a venomous look, but turned and stormed out of the cafe. Emma's heart pounded. Had she just made a huge mistake? She turned to Keanu, her face apologetic. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause a scene." Keanu, however, looked at her with something like admiration. That was brave. She laughed nervously, still trying to steady her breathing. Probably reckless. He shook his head. "No, you saw something was off, and you acted. Most people wouldn't." She swallowed, the reality of what had just happened hitting her. Are you okay? Keanu nodded. Yeah. And I appreciate what you did. He reached into his pocket, pulled out $100 bill, and placed it on the counter. For your bravery. Emma stared at it, shaking her head. Oh no, I can't. He smiled, gently pushing it toward her. Consider it a tip. You earned it. She hesitated but finally took the bill. Thank you. Really. Keanu gave her one last nod before grabbing his coffee and walking out the door. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. What just happened? But before she could process it, the cafe manager, Mr. Whitmore, stormed toward her, his face red with anger. Emma, what the hell was that? Her stomach dropped. I was just trying to keep things safe. Safe? You threw coffee at a customer. He was acting suspicious. I don't care. Do you have any idea what this could do to our reputation? Emma's mouth went dry. But, you're fired. The words hit her like a slap. She blinked, trying to process it. You can't be serious. Oh, I am. Pack your things. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked around. Some customers were whispering, others watching awkwardly. No one spoke up for her. Swallowing her pride, she untied her apron, set it on the counter, and turned toward the door. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, a wave of emotions hit her. Shock, anger, fear. She had just lost her job for helping someone. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced them back. Little did she know, the events of that night were just the beginning of a life-changing journey. A twist of fate. Los Angeles, 9:15 p.m. Emma Carter sat on the edge of a weathered park bench, her fingers gripping the crisp $100 bill as if it were the last bit of stability she had left. The bustling streets of Los Angeles hummed around her, cars zooming by, distant laughter from late-night diners, and the rhythmic tapping of hurried footsteps on the sidewalk. But for Emma, the world had suddenly gone quiet. She had been fired, just like that. Her entire livelihood, gone in the blink of an eye. Her mind replayed the events of the evening in a loop. Had she done the right thing? She had acted on instinct, sensing danger, but now she was out of a job with barely any savings to keep her afloat. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Bills were piling up. The dream she had of becoming a writer was now buried under the crushing weight of reality. She let out a shuddering sigh, tucking the bill into her worn-out wallet. What now? She whispered to herself. The night air was cool against her skin as she pulled her thin jacket tighter around her. She had no one to call, no backup plan. Just herself and an uncertain future. And then, as if the universe had decided to add another twist to her night, her phone vibrated. She glanced down at the screen. A text message from an unknown number. Unknown. Hey, is this Emma Carter? Her brow furrowed. Who could this be? She hesitated before replying. Emma, who is this? The response came almost instantly. Unknown. It's KeanuReeves. Emma's heart stopped. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reread the message. Convinced she was imagining things, KeanuReeves was texting her. Emma. Is this a joke? Keanu. No joke. I got your number from the cafe's customer list before I left. I hope that's okay. Her breath caught in her throat. He had gone out of his way to contact her. Emma. Yeah, it's okay. I guess. What's up? Keanu. I heard what happened after I left. You got fired because of me. That's not right. Emma felt her stomach tighten. She didn't want him to feel guilty. Emma, it wasn't your fault. My boss is just difficult. Keanu. Still, you shouldn't have lost your job for doing the right thing. Are you okay? Her fingers hovered over the screen. No one had asked her that tonight. Emma. Honestly. No. But I'll figure it out. A long pause. Then. Keanu. Meet me at Cafe Verona tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. Trust me. Emma stared at the message, her mind spinning. What could this possibly be about? For a moment, she debated whether she should even go. But then again, what did she have to lose? The next morning, Cafe Verona, 9:00 a.m. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the small upscale cafe on the quieter side of downtown. Emma stepped inside, nerves coiling in her stomach. She had barely slept, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities about why KeanuReeves wanted to meet her. She spotted him almost immediately. He was seated at a corner table, dressed casually in a leather jacket and jeans, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He looked up as she approached, offering a warm smile. "You came," he said. Emma managed a small smile as she slid into the chair across from him. "Yeah, curiosity got the best of me." He chuckled. "That's a good trait." A waitress approached, and Emma quickly ordered a simple cappuccino, still feeling a bit surreal about the situation. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Look, I won't take up too much of your time, but I wanted to personally thank you again for what you did last night. Not just for me, but for standing up for what you believed was right." Emma shrugged, trying to downplay it. "I just reacted." "That's what makes it special," he said. "Most people hesitate. You didn't." She looked down, stirring her cappuccino. "Well, it got me fired." Keanu nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "And that's exactly why I asked you to meet me." She raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan to get my job back." He smirked. "Not exactly." He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "Tell me something, Emma. If you could do anything in the world, what would it be?" Emma blinked at the unexpected question. I don't know." "Sure you do," he said, his eyes studying her. "Something inside you wants more than just waiting tables at a cafe." Emma hesitated. Was it possible he somehow knew? She exhaled, deciding to be honest. "I've always wanted to be a writer, but life keeps getting in the way." Keanu leaned back, a slow smile forming. "A writer? That's amazing. What kind of stories?" Emma shrugged. "Stories that matter. Stories that make people feel something. I guess I just want to make a difference." Keanu was silent for a moment, then nodded as if he had just made a decision. "All right," he said. "Here's the deal." Emma leaned in, intrigued. "I have a friend, a film producer, who's working on a new project, a film based on real stories of kindness and resilience. They need a writer, someone fresh, passionate, and unafraid to tell the truth." Emma's heart pounded. Was he serious? He continued, "I can set up a meeting for you. No promises, but you get a real shot." Emma felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. "You mean you're offering me a chance to write for a real movie?" Keanu nodded. "That's exactly what I mean." Emma stared at him, struggling to process everything. Just hours ago, she had been fired, feeling lost. And now, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood was offering her a chance to break into the industry. It felt like a dream. "But why?" she finally asked. Keanu's expression softened. "Because people like you, people who stand up, who care, deserve a shot. And because I believe in paying kindness forward." Emma swallowed hard, emotions swelling in her chest. She had spent her whole life doubting herself, feeling like she wasn't enough. And yet, here was KeanuReeves, of all people, believing in her. "Are you in?" he asked. Emma's answer was instant. "Yes." The road to the unknown. Los Angeles, 10:30 a.m. A door opens. Emma Carter walked out of Cafe Verona with a strange mix of exhilaration and disbelief swirling inside her. The city's usual morning buzz, cars honking, people chatting, the aroma of fresh pastries from nearby bakeries, felt oddly distant as her mind replayed everything Keanu had just told her. A shot. A real chance. She had spent years working dead-end jobs, feeling like her dreams were slipping further and further out of reach. And now, within less than 24 hours of losing her job, the universe had thrown her a curveball, a meeting with a Hollywood producer. As she clutched her phone tightly, still processing Keanu's words, a message popped up. Keanu, meeting is set, tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll send you the location. Be ready. Her breath caught. Tomorrow. She barely had time to prepare. Her hands trembled as she typed back. Emma, thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you. Keanu, you don't have to. Just be yourself. That's enough. She exhaled, staring at the screen. Be herself. That sounded simple enough, but was it? Her heart pounded as she realized. This wasn't just any meeting. This could change everything. That night, doubt creeps in. Emma sat on her tiny apartment's couch, her laptop perched on her knees, the blank document staring back at her. She had planned to write something, anything, to bring to the meeting, but nothing was coming out. Her mind was clouded with self-doubt. Who was she kidding? She had never written for a film before. Sure, she loved storytelling, but real writers had degrees, connections, experience. She had none of that. What if she bombed the meeting? What if they laughed at her? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed. She groaned, shutting the laptop with a frustrated sigh. Maybe she was getting ahead of herself. Maybe this was just another false hope. A knock at the door startled her. Frowning, she got up and peered through the peephole. Her breath hitched. It was Keanu. A late-night conversation. Emma quickly opened the door, heart racing. Keanu. He gave her a small smile, holding up a takeout bag. Thought you might be hungry. For a moment, she just stared, stunned. KeanuReeves was standing at her doorstep with food. This was unreal. Shaking herself out of it, she stepped aside. Yeah. Come in. As he walked in, she took a second to glance around her tiny apartment. A mismatched couch, a stack of books on a wobbly table, old movie posters covering the walls. It wasn't much, but it was home. Keanu placed the food on the table and sat down on the couch like it was the most normal thing in the world. Figured you might be stressing about tomorrow. Emma let out a nervous laugh. Understatement of the year. He nodded knowingly, opening the takeout box and handing her a container of noodles. You don't have to be perfect, you know. She hesitated before taking the food, her stomach growling despite her anxiety. I don't want to mess this up. Keanu leaned back, watching her carefully. Tell me something. When did you first realize you wanted to write? Emma blinked. I don't know. I guess I always did. When I was a kid, I used to make up stories and read them to my little brother before bed. He begged me for another chapter every night. Keanu smiled. And how did that make you feel? She thought for a moment, warmth spreading in her chest, like I was doing something that mattered, like I could create whole worlds just by putting words together. He nodded. That's what you need to hold on to tomorrow. Not the pressure, not the fear, just that feeling. Emma swallowed hard. No one had ever talked to her like this before. She took a deep breath. You really think I have a shot? Keanu gave her a small but confident nod. I wouldn't have set up the meeting if I didn't. Her chest tightened. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The next day, the moment of truth. Emma stood outside the towering glass office building in downtown Leh, staring up at its intimidating height. The sun reflected off the windows, making it seem even more imposing. She clutched the small notebook in her hands, a few pages of ideas she had written down after her talk with Keanu last night. It wasn't much, but it was something. Her phone buzzed. Keanu, you got this. Just breathe. She exhaled, straightened her shoulders, and walked inside. The receptionist directed her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, but when the doors finally opened, she stepped out into a sleek, modern office. A man in his early 50s, wearing a crisp suit and designer glasses, was waiting for her. "You must be Emma," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel Carter, executive producer. Keanu spoke highly of you." Emma shook his hand, trying not to let her nerves show. "It's an honor to meet you." Daniel motioned for her to sit across from him at the large conference table. "So, Keanu tells me you have a passion for storytelling. Tell me about that." Emma took a deep breath, her fingers gripping her notebook. "I've always believed that stories have power, that they can change the way people see the world. And I think kindness deserves to be told." Daniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Kindness?" She nodded. "So many films focus on drama, violence, and conflict. But the small, quiet acts of kindness, those are the ones that shape us the most. They change lives. And I want to write stories that remind people of that." For a long moment, Daniel studied her. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "That's refreshing," he admitted. "Most writers pitch thrillers, action scripts, but kindness." He leaned back, nodding. "I like it." Emma's heart soared. "Let's do this," Daniel continued. "I have a project in early development, a collection of short films, each one based on real stories of kindness and human connection. We've been struggling to find the right voice. Maybe you're it." Emma blinked. "Wait, are you offering me a job?" Daniel chuckled. "Not a full-time position just yet. But how about this? You write a sample script. If it fits our vision, we'll bring you on board." Emma could barely breathe. This was it. Her chance. She nodded firmly, determination in her eyes. "I won't let you down." Daniel smiled. "Good. Keanu was right about you." The weight of a dream. Los Angeles. The morning after. Emma Carter woke up to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her tiny apartment. For a moment, she lay there, blinking, as if trying to convince herself that yesterday had actually happened. A meeting with a Hollywood producer, a real shot at writing a film. She sat up quickly, grabbing her notebook from the nightstand and flipping through the pages she had written late into the night. Her heart pounded. This was real. This was happening. But now came the hard part. She had to deliver. She had one chance to prove herself, and she knew that the industry was ruthless. No one was going to hold her hand through this. If her script wasn't good enough, she'd be back to square one. Jobless, struggling, and wondering what could have been. No pressure, right? A new routine, writing and out. Emma spent the entire day at her small desk, fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. But the words wouldn't come. She had ideas, so many ideas, but nothing felt good enough. Everything she wrote sounded forced, stiff. The pressure was getting to her. Her mind was a battlefield of self-doubt. Who was she to think she could do this? What if Keanu had made a mistake by recommending her? The cursor on the screen blinked at her, taunting her. She groaned, shutting the laptop with frustration. She needed air. A chance encounter. A stranger's story. Emma grabbed her jacket and decided to take a walk through the city. She found herself wandering into a small, quiet park, one she often passed but never really stopped to appreciate. As she sat on a weathered bench, she noticed an elderly man nearby, feeding pigeons. His hands were wrinkled, his movements slow but careful. There was something peaceful about him, something timeless. After a few minutes, he turned to her and smiled. "You look like someone carrying the weight of the world." Emma hesitated, then let out a small laugh. "Yeah, something like that." The man nodded, tossing another handful of breadcrumbs onto the ground. "Funny thing about burdens," he said. "They always feel heavier when you try to carry them alone." Emma looked at him, intrigued. "You sound like you know a thing or two about that." The man chuckled. "I used to be a school teacher, taught for nearly 40 years, but you know what I learned most." She shook her head. "That stories save people." He looked at her, eyes wise and kind. "We all have our own struggles, but when we hear someone else's story, we don't feel so alone anymore." Emma felt a shiver go down her spine. Stories. That was it. The pressure, the fear, none of that mattered. What mattered was telling a story that meant something. A story that someone, somewhere, needed to hear. She stood up suddenly, adrenaline rushing through her veins. "Thank you," she said, surprising even herself. The old man smiled. "Go write your story, young lady." And just like that, she ran back home. The writing flow. A breakthrough. Emma didn't hesitate this time. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and started typing. Words spilled out of her like they had been waiting for this exact moment. She wrote about a woman who lost everything but still chose kindness. A woman who stood up for what was right even when it cost her. She wrote about herself. For the next 10 hours, she barely stopped, only pausing to sip water or stretch her aching fingers. She didn't think. She didn't overanalyze. She just wrote. And when she finally finished, she sat back, breathless. She had done it. A full script, her first. Her fingers trembled as she read through it. There were flaws, sure, but the heart was there. Submission day. A leap of faith. The next morning, Emma printed out her script, carefully stacking the pages together. She stared at it for a moment, nerves creeping in again. This was it, all or nothing. She took a deep breath, grabbed her bag, and headed toward the production studio where Daniel Carter, the Hollywood producer, was expecting her. As she walked through the glass doors of the sleek high-rise building, she felt like she had stepped into an entirely different world. The air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh paper. The floors gleamed. Everyone looked busy, purposeful. A receptionist guided her to a waiting room. The walls were lined with framed posters of iconic films, some she had grown up watching. Now she was here, hoping to have her name in the credits of one someday. Her hands were sweating as the door opened. Daniel Carter stepped in, holding a coffee cup. He glanced at her, then at the script in her hands. "You finished it." Emma swallowed and nodded. "Yeah." He took the stack of papers, flipping through the first few pages. Then, without a word, he sat down and began reading. The silence was agonizing. Emma felt like she was going to pass out. What if he hated it? She stole a glance at his face. He was completely focused. No reaction, no smile, no frown, just reading. Minutes passed, then 20 minutes, then 40. Finally, he set the script down. He looked at her. Emma braced herself. "This," he said slowly, "is really good." Emma's heart nearly stopped. "Wait, what?" He smirked. "It needs polish, but the heart, it's there. And that's something you can't teach." Emma felt an overwhelming wave of relief crash over her. "So, what does this mean?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "It means you're in. We'll bring you on as a junior writer for this project. You'll work with a team, but your story, it's part of this film now." Emma's mouth fell open. She had done it. She had just landed her first Hollywood writing job. Keanu's reaction. A full circle moment. That evening, Emma sat at her favorite diner, staring at her phone. Finally, she mustered the courage to text Keanu. "Emma, they loved it. I got the job." Seconds later, her phone rang. It was him. She picked up, her voice still shaky with disbelief. "Hey." Keanu's voice was warm. "Emma, that's incredible." She let out a breathless laugh. "I still can't believe it." "I can," he said. "I knew you had it in you." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "I don't know how to thank you for this." Keanu chuckled. "You already did. You proved me right." She smiled, staring out the diner window at the glowing city beyond. For the first time in years, she wasn't lost. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The reality of dreams. Los Angeles. The first day on set. Emma Carter stood outside the massive film studio, gripping her bag tightly. The morning sun reflected off the sleek glass doors, and she could already hear the faint buzz of activity inside. This was it, her first real day as a Hollywood writer. Her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but now, standing at the edge of it, doubt crept in. Would she be able to keep up? Was she really good enough to be here? Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and stepped inside. Meeting the team, a cold welcome. The production office was buzzing with energy. Writers, directors, and producers moved around quickly, each focused on their tasks. The walls were lined with storyboards, concept sketches, and scripts in progress. Emma was directed to a large conference room where she would be meeting the writing team. As she walked in, the intimidation hit her hard. There were about 8 people at the long table, each looking sharp, confident, like they belonged. Some of them were typing away on their laptops. Others were deep in conversation. At the head of the table was Daniel Carter, the producer who had given her this opportunity. He glanced up and smiled. "Emma, glad you could join us." She forced a smile, taking the empty seat at the far end of the table. A woman with perfectly styled hair and an air of authority glanced at her. "So you're the new one?" Emma swallowed. "Yeah, first day." The woman didn't smile. "Welcome to the trenches." Emma wasn't sure if that was meant to be friendly or a warning. Daniel cleared his throat. "All right, let's get started. We're finalizing the script drafts, and we need strong emotional depth in these stories. Emma, your concept really resonated, so we'd love for you to bring that perspective here." Emma nodded, nerves prickling at the back of her neck. This was her shot. She couldn't mess this up. The pressure, sink or swim. The next few hours were a blur of intense discussion. The team debated character arcs, emotional beats, and how to make the audience truly feel something. Emma had never been in an environment like this before. The pace was relentless. People spoke fast, ideas bounced around the room, and everyone seemed so sure of themselves. She tried to jump in, but every time she opened her mouth, someone else spoke first. It felt like she was an outsider looking in. And then it got worse. At one point, Daniel turned to her. "Emma, you wrote the original concept for the kindness story. How do you think we can make this moment stronger?" Emma's mouth went dry. All eyes turned to her. She scrambled for words, but her brain felt like static. The pressure was too much. She hesitated, second-guessing herself. "Maybe we could add a moment where the main character reflects on." The woman with the sharp gaze, Lisa, the lead writer, cut her off. "Too vague. We need specifics." Emma's face burned with embarrassment. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "All right, we'll circle back to it. Let's move on." Emma sank lower in her chair. She had just blown her first chance to contribute. A tough lesson. Keanu's advice. That evening, Emma sat at a quiet cafe, staring at her untouched coffee. Her first day had been rough. She felt completely out of place. Her phone buzzed. A text from Keanu. "Keanu, how was day 1?" She sighed before replying. "Emma, disaster." I froze. I feel like I don't belong. A few seconds later, her phone rang. She hesitated before answering. "Talk to me," Keanu said gently. Emma let out a deep breath. "I don't know if I can do this. Everyone there is so confident, so fast." I couldn't even get a full sentence out before someone dismissed it. Keanu was silent for a moment before speaking. "Emma, do you know what my first audition in Hollywood was like?" She frowned. I walked in thinking I had prepared the perfect monologue. Halfway through, I forgot my lines. Completely blanked. Emma's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Oh yeah, it was humiliating. I thought my career was over before it even started." She leaned forward, gripping her coffee cup. "What did you do?" "I went home, and I made a choice," Keanu said. "I could either let that moment define me, or I could learn from it. So I worked harder. I studied, practiced, and showed up again the next time. And the time after that. Until eventually, I wasn't the guy who froze anymore. Emma swallowed hard. Emma. Keanu continued, no one expects you to be perfect on your first day. They expect you to grow. You don't have to prove yourself in one meeting. You just have to show up. Again and again. Emma exhaled, feeling something shift inside her. Maybe today hadn't been a failure. Maybe it was just the first step. A different approach. Finding her voice. The next morning, Emma arrived at the studio earlier than anyone else. She found an empty corner, pulled out her notebook, and started rewriting the scene that had stumped her yesterday. This time, she didn't worry about impressing anyone. She just wrote from the heart. By the time the meeting started, she was ready. Daniel walked in, scanning the room. All right, let's continue from where we left off yesterday. Before he could move on, Emma raised her hand. I actually took another look at the kindness scene, she said, her voice steadier than before. I made some adjustments. Lisa arched an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. Daniel nodded. All right, let's hear it. Emma took a deep breath and read her revision aloud. The room was silent as she spoke. She could see people leaning in, listening. When she finished, Daniel smiled. That is much stronger. Emma's heart leaped. Lisa gave a small nod. Yeah, that works. It wasn't high praise, but coming from her, it was a win. For the first time since stepping into this world, Emma felt a flicker of confidence. She had a long way to go, but she had just taken her first real step forward. The climb to success. Los Angeles. A new chapter begins. Emma Carter stepped out of the towering film studio, taking in a deep breath of the cool evening air. The city around her buzzed with life. Cars honking, streetlights flickering, and pedestrians hurrying to their destinations. But for the first time since stepping into the cutthroat world of Hollywood, she didn't feel like an outsider. She had spoken up today. She had been heard. And even though it was a small victory, it was enough to keep her going. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from Keanu. Keanu, how did today go? A small smile tugged at her lips. Emma, better. I didn't freeze this time. Keanu, told you. Keep going. She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back. Emma, thanks for believing in me. Keanu, no need to thank me. Just prove me right. She chuckled softly, pocketing her phone. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to grow. And she was ready. A month later, from rookie to rising star, days turned into weeks, and Emma adapted. She learned the rhythms of the writer's room, when to listen, when to speak, and when to fight for an idea that mattered. At first, she kept to herself, absorbing as much knowledge as she could. But soon, she started contributing more, finding her own voice among a team of seasoned professionals. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Her kindness story, the same one that had gotten her here, was now one of the film's main narratives. The producers loved her ability to bring depth and emotion to the characters. Daniel Carter, the executive producer, even pulled her aside one afternoon. You've got something special, Emma, he told her. You understand emotion in a way most writers don't. Hearing those words sent a rush of pride through her. But success came with new challenges. Hollywood's harsh reality. The first setback. Not everyone was happy with Emma's rise. Lisa, the lead writer who had been skeptical of her from the start, wasn't impressed. One afternoon, Emma was called into Daniel's office. As she walked in, she saw Lisa already seated, arms crossed, looking unimpressed. Daniel cleared his throat. We need to talk about some revisions to your script. Emma's stomach dropped. What kind of revisions? Lisa flipped through the pages in front of her. Your version of the kindness story is a bit too sentimental. Emma frowned. Isn't that the point? It's a story about small acts of kindness that change lives. Lisa sighed. Yes, but Hollywood likes grit, conflict, Edge, your version is great for an indie film, but this needs more impact, more drama. Emma clenched her fists under the table. She had poured her soul into this script. Now, they wanted to change it. Daniel looked at her carefully. We're not saying scrap it. Just adjust it. Make it sharper. Emma's mind raced. Was this just part of the industry? Or was this Lisa's way of pushing her down? Either way, she had a choice to make. She could either fight for her story or prove that she could adapt without losing its heart. She took a deep breath. I'll make the changes, she said finally, but let me find a way to keep the emotion intact. Lisa gave a small smirk, as if she had expected Emma to crumble. But Emma wasn't crumbling. She was rising. Keanu's unexpected visit. A lesson in resilience. That evening, Emma was buried in rewrites when she heard a knock at her apartment door. She opened it to find Keanu standing there, holding 2 takeout bags. You look like you could use a break, he said, stepping inside. Emma sighed, setting her laptop aside. You have no idea. They sat on the couch, eating in comfortable silence before Keanu finally spoke. Tell me what's wrong. Emma ran a hand through her hair. They want to change my script. Make it edgier. Less heartfelt. Keanu nodded slowly. And how do you feel about that? She hesitated, frustrated, but I also don't want to be the writer who can't take feedback. He leaned forward. Hollywood will always try to change your story. That's the business. The real skill. Figuring out what to fight for. Emma absorbed his words. What to fight for. That was it. She didn't have to fight everything, just the things that mattered most. A bold move, standing her ground. The next morning, Emma walked into the studio with a plan. She had spent the entire night rewriting her script, not by taking out the emotion, but by weaving the drama into it naturally. When she handed it in, Lisa flipped through the pages, frowning. You didn't cut the emotional depth, Lisa said flatly. No, Emma said, her voice steady. I made it stronger. I gave the conflict more weight, but without losing what made the story special. Lisa studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. We'll see what Daniel thinks. Emma didn't reply. She just waited. And 2 days later, Daniel called her into his office. When she stepped inside, he was smiling. Emma, he said, setting the script down. You proved me wrong. This is even better than before. Relief washed over her. She had done it, not by compromising, but by finding a way to make her story even more powerful. Lisa never admitted she was wrong, but after that day, she never doubted Emma's abilities again. Emma's first premiere. A dream realized. Months passed in a whirlwind of late nights, revisions, and intense creative work. And then, the film was done. Emma stood in a designer dress on the red carpet, cameras flashing around her. Her name was in the credits of a Hollywood film. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was real, it felt even more surreal. Keanu was there too, standing nearby, watching her with quiet pride. As she turned to him, she smiled. You were right. He raised an eyebrow. About what? She exhaled. About not giving up. Keanu grinned. I knew you had it in you. As she looked around at the dazzling lights, the flashing cameras, and the faces of people who had once dismissed her but now respected her, she knew. This was just the beginning. A legacy of stories. Hollywood. 1 year later. Emma Carter sat at her desk in a bright, modern office in one of Hollywood's most prestigious production companies. The skyline of Los Angeles stretched beyond the glass windows, a city filled with countless dreamers, just like she had been. But she wasn't just dreaming anymore. She was living it. Her journey from a struggling cafe worker to a Hollywood screenwriter had been nothing short of extraordinary. The film that had once been a mere idea in her notebook had made its way onto the big screen, touching audiences across the world. Critics praised its raw emotion and depth, and industry veterans were starting to notice her. But despite the success, she knew the real challenge wasn't just getting here. It was staying here. And more importantly, staying true to herself. The next big opportunity. Emma was deep in thought, reviewing a script draft, when her phone buzzed. It was an email from Daniel Carter, the producer who had once taken a chance on her. Subject: exciting news. Let's talk. She clicked it open, scanning the message. Daniel wanted to offer her a lead writing position on a brand new film, her own project. Emma's heart pounded. This wasn't just another assignment. This was her chance to tell the kind of story she had always wanted, on her own terms. But there was one problem. As she scrolled further down, she noticed something. The film was a big-budget thriller, the kind of movie that focused on shock value rather than heart. Her stomach twisted. Yes, it was a huge career move. Yes, it would make her name even bigger in Hollywood. But was it her story? Would she be able to pour her soul into something that didn't align with her voice? She tapped her fingers on her desk, her mind racing. This was a defining moment. A meeting with Keanu, seeking clarity. That evening, Emma met Keanu at a quiet restaurant tucked away in the hills of Los Angeles. It had become a tradition of sorts. Whenever she felt lost, he somehow knew how to bring her back to herself. As they sat across from each other, Keanu studied her expression. "You're overthinking something." Emma sighed, stirring her iced tea. "I got an offer. A big one." Keanu nodded. "That's great. So why do you look like you're carrying the weight of the world?" She exhaled. "Because it's not the kind of story I want to tell." Keanu leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Then why are you considering it?" Emma hesitated. "Because it's huge. It could change my career forever." Keanu smiled slightly. "Your career already changed forever, Emma." She frowned. "Yeah, but this would make me unstoppable. It would put me in a place where I wouldn't have to fight to be taken seriously anymore." Keanu tilted his head. "But at what cost?" Emma fell silent. He continued, "Let me ask you something. When we first met, what did you tell me you wanted?" She swallowed. "I wanted to write stories that matter." He nodded. "And does this movie feel like one of those stories?" Emma clenched her jaw. "No." Keanu leaned back. "Then there's your answer." Emma exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "But what if I never get another opportunity like this?" Keanu smiled knowingly. "You will. Because you don't need Hollywood to shape you. You shape Hollywood." His words hit her like a bolt of clarity. She had been so focused on climbing the ladder, she had forgotten why she started climbing in the first place. Turning down Hollywood, the boldest move yet. The next morning, Emma sat across from Daniel in his sleek office, the script proposal sitting between them. Daniel was smiling. "Emma, this is going to be a game changer. The studio is investing millions into this. If you take this on, you'll be one of the most sought-after writers in Hollywood." Emma took a deep breath. "I really appreciate the offer, Daniel." His smile faltered slightly. "But..." Emma hesitated, then met his gaze. "But it's not the story I want to tell." The room was dead silent. Daniel leaned back, studying her. "Emma, do you know what you're walking away from?" She nodded. "Yeah, and it's terrifying." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're one of the first young writers I've met with the guts to say no to something this big." Emma swallowed hard. "I don't want to write just anything. I want to write things that matter. I want to make movies that stay with people long after the credits roll." Daniel watched her for a moment, then smiled. "You know what?" he said. "I respect that." Emma blinked. "You do?" Daniel nodded. "Most people in this business forget why they started. You haven't. That's rare." He leaned forward. "So tell me, what story do you want to tell?" Emma's chest tightened with emotion. He wasn't dismissing her. He was giving her a chance to pitch what she truly wanted. She took a deep breath. "I have an idea," she said. And it's about kindness. Daniel smirked. Of course it is. Emma smiled. And then she began to pitch. A new era, Emma's impact on Hollywood. Months later, Emma Carter sat in a theater, watching as her second film, one she had fully conceptualized and written herself, played on the big screen. It was a story about human connection, about how the smallest moments of kindness shape lives in ways we can't always see. As the credits rolled, the audience sat in stunned silence, many with tears in their eyes. And then, a standing ovation. Emma swallowed hard, emotion welling up inside her. She had stayed true to herself. She had fought for the right stories. And now, she was no longer just a writer. She was a storyteller with purpose. As she stepped outside the theater, Keanu was waiting for her, leaning casually against a pillar. He smirked. Told you. Emma laughed, shaking her head. You're never going to let me forget that, are you? Keanu shrugged. Nope. She let out a deep breath, looking up at the sky. This was only the beginning. Because stories had power. And she was just getting started. The end, or just the beginning. Final thoughts. What we can learn from Emma's journey. Emma's story isn't just about breaking into Hollywood. It's about choosing authenticity over validation. It's about remembering why you started, even when the world tries to mold you into something else. Her journey reminds us that success isn't about taking every opportunity. It's about taking the right ones. And most importantly, it's about knowing that kindness, passion, and staying true to yourself will always be the most powerful story of all.